My name is David Simmer II, and my favorite thing is travel.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones. It is Sunday, December 13th. We're in the middle of Hanukkah, so happy Hanukkah, Chag Sameach to everyone who's celebrating. Today's interview was recorded on Thanksgiving, and what I can tell you is the pumpkins that I talk about that are roasting during the interview, my neighbor Ezra and I turned into a pumpkin kugel as a side dish / dessert for our Thanksgiving meal, and it worked out quite well. I can't believe we're down to the last few weeks of 2020. I've never looked forward to a new year more than this one. So I hope people have been able to continue to stay safe this month. The first vaccines rolled out of Pfizer's factories in Kalamazoo, Michigan today. That's exciting. I'm so excited for doctors and nurses and frontline workers to start getting vaccines. I'm hopeful. I'm feeling hopeful. If you are interested, a few years ago, I wrote a book as a Christmas gift to my dad. For the first night of candle lighting, I recorded the audio and put it with the illustrations I did for the book, and I put it on my synagogue's YouTube channel. So it's called Hanukkah on Miller Drive. It's a story of imagining what would happen if a Jewish family moved onto a Christmas light destination cul-de-sac. So if you want a little Hanukkah story, you can find that. I'll link to it in the show notes. So it's called Hanukkah on Miller Drive. It's a collaboration between me and my dad. I'm also trying to make it I'm trying to do like an mini audiobook of it, and I'm having fun with sound effects. But I think I might actually have to ask someone who does voiceovers. But I have found like the sound of peeling potatoes, walking through the snow. It's very fun, and I don't really know what I'm doing. So who knows what will happen there. So yeah, this week I'm talking with David Simmer II. He is a friend of mine from the internet. His blog is called Blogography. I have dug up the original blog posts that I found him through, so I'll link to that in the show notes as well. Also a couple different searches of his site, because we're talking about travel. So this is an episode we talk about mostly about David's travel, some about mine, about traveling, going on cruises, traveling with family, traveling for cultural lessons, looking at Western culture, looking at indigenous cultures. It's a good conversation, and I hope that you enjoy it. It's a chance to daydream about the days when we can travel again, and I think it's a nice conversation. So with that, I hope you are having a good Hanukkah, a good winter, and that you continue to wear your mask and wash your hands, stay home and stay safe, and keep on enjoying your favorite things. Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we learn about people's favorite things and we get recommendations without using an algorithm. Today, I am very excited. I am joined by David Simmer II. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing well. How about you, Leah?
I'm good. I've got pumpkins roasting in the oven and a neighbor who's supposed to come in the next 15 minutes and get them out. So, because we're recording on Thanksgiving, And
happy Thanksgiving, by the way.
Oh yeah, happy Thanksgiving. And in my CSA vegetable box, they sent me 2 small pumpkins that I decided to see what happens if you put them in the oven.
Oh, well, no travel to Epicurious to find out what that might entail?
Well, I started, everything says like cut it in half, put it face down, roast it. That's step 1 of anything you're going to do with a pumpkin. So that's where I'm at right now.
Oh, well.
And I don't have a plan for what comes next.
Good luck on that. And if you have to interrupt this to deal with a fire in the kitchen, I will perfectly understand.
Thank you. So David and I know each other. I've had a lot of people on that I know from Twitter, but we know each other from blogging, from the old school world of blogging. When I had my blog that was originally Leah in London and then accidentally Jewish, but David has been at blogography.com for always, right?
You know what? I should have probably know this, but I don't know when I started because I had other blogs before blogography. It's just that this is the one that's stuck for 20 years or however long it's been.
Yeah, because I started blogging in 2003, which is 17 years ago, which is bananas. So David's blog, blogography, I found for the first time when I was working in PR. And I was doing research. I must have been doing research for the Axe team. And we were looking at what people said on blogs about toiletries. And you had a blog post with a review about a shampoo you were using. And that I think so, like a philosophy shampoo, or this is at least how I remember it. I believe I remember finding your blog in the course of research, adding you to my Google Reader.
Google Reader.
R.I.P. And then, and you kind of like independently found my blog, like not doing research on shampoo. And we've met in person a few times during some of your, during Dave Cago, which was you were in town and you got a bunch of bloggers together and we went to Peace Pizza and then we went to a cocktail bar on Damon. It was like the first very cool cocktail bar in Chicago. And I almost didn't meet the dress code, but they let me in anyway.
Well, now Chicago's overrun with swanky bars and eateries and other type things.
Absolutely. This was one that was, it's on Damon. It's south of North Avenue, and they have like a plywood front door. That's all I cannot unlock any more in my brain about it.
So you're obviously not a patron then.
No, because now there's one called the Sixth that's like half a mile walk from my house. That's like very fancy cocktails, but more neighborhood prices. So I go to that one.
Okay.
It's very nice. So so on blogography, you have the Tales of Bad Monkey. You are a go-to person. If I want to know whether or not to spend time on a TV show or a movie, I find out from you because you give such good reviews and you have such outstanding taste, I think, in movies and TV. We met through the internet and we've been friends now for probably 12 or 15 years.
Probably.
Yeah. So how has this COVID pause been treating you?
Well, as you might imagine, we're doing a show about travel where I am used to traveling thousands upon thousands of miles every year. This is the first year in decades where I've gone nowhere. I've gone nowhere. So, it's been tough, both for my work, for the volunteerism I do and other things, and just vacation. I'm used to traveling the world, and I now travel in my living room through Google Maps. That's about where all the places I go are on Google Maps now. Yeah.
It has been very weird. I took one trip to California in February, which I, of course, was like, assumed was the first of many trips I would take this year. But towards the end of that trip, there were some murmurs of COVID and like a little bit of growing concern. And then, and then we've been grounded all year.
Well, the organization that I volunteer with is kind of a medical type charity. And so I was getting the early returns on COVID in February. All of our travel was suspended the weekend after Valentine's Day. So it was like the 17th or something like that. So we were already on lockdown in February. And of course, it would be months before it kind of cascaded over the United States. But I was already done. My last trip was in December around Christmas time.
Yeah, I was in Christmas. I was out your way. I was in Idaho. I went to Moscow, and then I went to Kellogg Mountain. Mm-hmm. Is that a mountain? Silver Mountain in Idaho.
Okay.
I don't know.
Skiing?
I was the aunt on the trip, so I was funding the skiing. I was not actually doing the skiing. So have you had, because I do know that you work a ton and even today you're in your office. Have you been watching any new shows, or have you been like revisiting your travel photography and re-editing photos?
Basically, there's one show to watch right now. Within the first couple episodes, it became my favorite television show of all time. I've watched every episode at least 4 times just because it's like comfort food during these trying times. And it's Ted Lasso. It's Jason Sudeikis. It's a show based on a skit he did about an American college football coach, I believe, who goes to instruct soccer in England. And I put off watching it for the first several episodes because I'm not a sports guy. I'm not interested in it. But the show has really nothing to do with sports. That's just a background of it. And it really is the most amazing show. And apparently Apple Plus, which is where it's airing, well worth the free trial to sign up and watch all 9 episodes. I think there are 10 episodes. Apple must have thought so too, because they renewed it for a second season right away and then renewed it for a third season on top of that. So the critical acclaim and buzz is completely worthwhile. It's my favorite television show of all time by a long shot.
And that says a lot to me because it's a new. There's one season out. It's 9 episodes, and
I think it might be 10. I think it's 10.
Okay, but it's a 2020 show, right? Came out in this year.
Oh yeah. In fact, it just wrapped up not too long ago. It's very recent, and it took me completely by surprise. The only reason I was tuning into it is because I got Apple TV Plus for free. Apple gave it to everybody who had an iPhone for like a year or something. I was bored because I'd seen everything on. The Hallmark movies hadn't started yet.
Yep.
I'm into those cheesy Hallmark movies, and nothing's out in theaters. All the Marvel Studio movies I've loved were gone. And so finally one day I just tuned in blind, not knowing what to expect. I expected to be kind of slapsticky type of comedy about sports that I have no interest in. But I had it on, and then it's like halfway through that first episode, I had to rewind to the start of it, watch from the beginning. And then it's one of those things that before you watch the next episode when it came on, you had to go back and rewatch the previous ones. And so it's just that kind of show. It's perfect soul food for 2020. I mean, it's real comfort food, I think, is how I describe it.
I'm going to have to figure out how to watch it because my friend Shai on Friday Night Movie Podcast, he and his sisters did a whole episode about it. And I've only heard great things. And I've heard that it is, and even listening to that episode and having the whole season spoiled, I don't have much of a memory. So I don't remember like what the twists are, which is fine with me. But it just sounds, you're like the 3rd or 4th person I've heard really give a big recommendation for it.
There's no show I recommend more right now. But as for photography, I was a long-time travel photographer. All the places I went, I took a lot of photos, and it kind of grew. I'd go on vacation, take a few snapshots, buy a better camera for next time, take more pictures, buy a better camera next time. Well, now it's all on my iPhone. I rarely take my DSLR camera anymore anywhere, just because the iPhone camera keeps getting better and better with each iteration. And the one on the iPhone 12 Pro Max that I just got, it's incredible. I mean, I don't know that I'll ever take my DSLR out again. It's just
wow,
so handy. Yeah.
Because I'm a Android, so I've got the Pixel. But again, I agree. Like the right camera to have is the camera you have.
Yep.
And so I had posted a picture a few weeks ago from a dinner at South by Southwest in 2009 or 2010. And the photograph I had was every single person. It was like phones on the table, and every person had a camera out taking pictures of their food. Yeah. And those days are long gone, that you would even have a point and shoot with you.
In fact, I was trying to think the other day when the last time that I had my real camera out, and it was when I went into an expedition to Antarctica in 2017, December 2017. That is the last time I used my DSLR camera. Everything is done since then has been with an iPhone.
Wow. That it's something else to think that they've gotten to that the cameras and the lenses and the processing has gotten to that level. It's phenomenal.
Yeah. And every time they up the game, it's like I buy a camera. I buy an iPhone not for the phone or the apps or anything. I rarely use them. I use the camera all the time though. And so that's why I am thankful Apple has this iPhone upgrade program, because otherwise I'd never be able to afford to buy a new $1,000 phone every year. And so every year Apple has this program where you make a monthly payment. You never own the phone, but at the end of the year, you trade it in for the next model. And I've been doing that. And I thought the iPhone 11 Pro was an amazing camera.
Yeah.
And then I got this new camera and started doing some test shots, and it was just unbelievable. It's just...
And that one is like this week or something, right? Last couple of weeks you got that new phone?
Yeah. Apple just released it. They had other phones that they released earlier, but the Max model, the model I have with the bigger camera sensor and all that other stuff, it came out just a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, that's cool.
And handy.
It's so handy.
One less thing to pack. Yeah.
Right. Just have to keep it charged. But you had to keep a DSLR charged too. So that's not a new problem.
But that one's a little easier because the DSLR, I've got a fanny pack full of batteries that I can swap out. And depending on where you go, if it's, like different places, the heat can make the batteries last less or things like that. And so you just get used to carrying them. Well, now it's like the battery on an iPhone lasts me, I use 25% of it if I'm not doing anything but shooting photos. If I shoot photos, I maybe run out by the end of the day. And it's just incredible handy. Yeah.
That's great. I was thinking about maybe my probably my second trip to Israel. So 2007, I was walking in the ramparts of the old city of Jerusalem, had my point and shoot hanging on a string on my wrist, cracked it against the wall, killed it. And I think on that trip, that would have been like maybe a BlackBerry Curve, a BlackBerry Pearl time in my life. So like a shitty camera, terrible camera. And so I had to go and get disposable cameras from like a convenience store or a tourist store. And I remember coming back across the border and having my broken camera, my BlackBerry, my rented cell phone that I got in Israel, 3 film cameras, probably a laptop and probably a flip. Remember the flip videos?
Oh, yeah.
And how hard it was for me to get across the border when I opened up my suitcase and I had like all these little bits and pieces of photography technology with me. And truly now it's just, I've got my charger, I've got my one adapter, and I've got my phone, and I'm good to go.
Yeah. Well, I can relate to that. And it always happens in the worst possible moment. It never happens when you're down the street from your house shooting flowers or something like that. It always happens on a trip of a lifetime. And eventually, in fact, the best story I have for that is in 2007. My mom wanted to go somewhere, and I said I'd take her on vacation. And we ended up on a cruise that went to Greece and Turkey and Egypt and all these places. So there we were at the Great Pyramids.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's when my camera decided to die on me, and there was no resurrecting it. And so all of the pictures I have at the Great Pyramids are of my mom's tiny little pocket camera, crummy pocket camera that she has, all these gorgeous sights and everything. And yeah, it was horrible. I had another little pocket camera that was weather sealed so it could go underwater.
Yeah.
That's what I ended up using for the rest of that amazing trip. And ever since then, when I went on vacation, I would travel with two cameras. So if one went down, I had another one.
It's an unfortunate life lesson. So people listening to us now, bring your phone and bring backup. You know, as you and I talked about what this interview would be about, I initially asked you to talk about Hard Rock cafes, because I have talked about you on other episodes because of how you used Hard Rock Cafe as almost gave you a checklist of places to go. And so you've seen so much of the world in your Hard Rock Cafe.
Well, kinda, because
so tell me about
that. Usually what happened is I went to my first Hard Rock Cafe when I was vacationing with friends in Maui. And you know, it wasn't even our first trip. It was like our second, third trip. Their parents owned a condo there. And so we were downtown Lahaina and we saw this thing called Hard Rock Cafe. And we thought, well, what could that be? So we wandered in and it looked like a really cool place, cool music, rock memorabilia on the walls. And I really liked it. I ended up buying a really pricey denim jacket with the, Hard Rock Cafe logo on it. I bought some pins and I just thought it was the coolest restaurant ever. Well, what I didn't know is that Hard Rock was a chain of restaurants. I thought it was just the one. Now, you have to remember, back in these days, there was no internet. There was an internet, but there wasn't a World Wide Web with, websites and stuff like this. It didn't exist. And so, I thought it was the only Hard Rock Cafe. And then I was in work, probably 2 or 3 years later, I was in LA and I was driving to my work. And here's this huge Hard Rock Cafe in Beverly Hills. It was like Beverly Center, a mall or something like that. This massive Hard Rock Cafe was there. And I thought, oh, wow, there's another one. They must have opened up a second one. Well, of course, a few months later, I was in San Diego, found out there was one in La Jolla, and then I ended up in Dallas and found out there was one there. And so what happened is that the Hard Rock Cafe was rarely my destination. I never just said, oh, I'm going to fly to Amsterdam now because there's a Hard Rock Cafe there. That rarely happened. What would usually happen is that I would fly to like London for work. Yeah. And then it's, those European flights are so cheap. You just hop on it. It's like hopping on a bus.
Absolutely.
And so all my trips to Europe, when I had work, I would just hop on a plane and go to a Hard Rock Cafe, spend the night in a really cool city. And then after a while, it got to be a lot more than the Hard Rock Cafe. It's like all the museums and the culture and all this other stuff, because it just started opening up wide. And I had, no idea that all of this stuff was there. And so while it started as a Hard Rock Cafe was like the destination when I'd say, oh, there's one in Dallas. I'm going to be in Austin. I'm going to drive down to Dallas. Eventually, it became an excuse to go somewhere like, oh, I'm going to be in Europe. I haven't been to Malta. So I'm going to fly to Malta, or I'm going to fly to Barcelona. And it's addictive because pretty soon the Hard Rock Cafes start to all look the same.
Mm-hmm.
But the places you go to see them are different. And, I did a lot of travel with my mom. She went through a really hard time. And just before that happened, I was taking a job in San Diego. I live in Washington State. And I had taken a job in San Diego, and it didn't start for 7 months because it was so new. They were actually building the building. They were building the offices and everything.
Wow.
So I had 7 months to kill. And I thought, probably I'm not going to see my mom a lot anymore. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take her on this trip. And my brother and I had already made trips to the UK, and we had been to Thailand. And I kind of got the travel bug before that because I went to Japan on work, and it just, another world to explore. And I just really got the travel bug kind of bit me. And so I started taking trips, and I thought, well, asked my mom where she wanted to go, and she wanted to go to Paris. So, we went to Paris, we went to Scotland, we went to these places. And then when we got back through things completely out of her control, her life fell apart. And I didn't end up taking the job in San Diego because I needed to help her out. And then it just got to be a tradition where every year I would take one vacation for myself, and then I would take one vacation with her. And so that's how I saw a lot of the world, was with my mother, and we were great friends. So it was a wonderful experience to share the world with her, and even better for me to see the world through someone else's eyes as well. Yeah. So
I remember we talked about it because you would do a combination, you would do cruises, right? Because
oh yeah. Well, see, I hate cruises. There's nothing I want less than to be trapped on a boat with a bunch of people when there's the world outside. But my mom loved it because it was so stress-free. Yeah. She didn't like packing up all your stuff in one city, taking a train to another city, unpacking all your stuff. That was really stressful to her. And so I started taking her on cruises. She loved them because she never had to unpack at the end of your little, you have a short little trip out, but then you come back and all your stuff's right where you left it in your cabin. The trip I was talking to you about to Egypt, I would ask her, it was her trip. I'd ask her, where do you want to go? And that year she said, well, I really want to go to Greece, because she would watch Travel Channel constantly thinking where was the next place that she wanted to go. And she wanted to go to Greece. And I says, oh, okay, we can go to Greece. Well, then she called me, and I was at work one day, and she said, I was looking at the atlas, and Egypt is really close to Greece. So I think that we should go to Egypt too. And it's like, well, Mom, on a map, it's just a couple inches, but there's customs, there's, all this other stuff. But let me look into it. Like the next week, an advertisement came through. We had cruised with Princess before or something like that. And Princess had this cruise that included Greece, Turkey, Egypt, and all these places. And so it was kismet, and so I spent all this money to fly to Greece, and then money to hop on a boat, and then have my camera break on me at one of the most fascinating places on earth. So yeah, good times.
So stressful. So you did a Mediterranean cruise.
Done a couple of those. Done a couple of Caribbean cruises. My mom, it's funny. I used to work in Orlando a lot. I would fly there 2 or 3 times a year, which was fine because I had friends there. Just like Chicago, I had a lot of work in Chicago, which is why I had all those meet up with bloggers in Chicago. But I would go to Orlando, and my mom loved just getting away. She just loved to travel. It didn't matter where it was. And so I said, well, yeah, come along. And so for several trips, she would come with me to Orlando, and we'd just go to Disney World afterwards. Well, one time when we were there, I called up a friend and I says, look, I'm getting really sick of Disney World. Please tell me that there's something else here to do. And he said, well, Disney World has Animal Kingdom park. It's a park with like a fake safari and all this other stuff. I mean, it's really well done, but it's Disney.
Right.
And so I took my mom on this kind of secret thing. It's not a ride you go to. It's something you book ahead of time. And it goes out onto the savannah of their safari ride. And it's kind of more like being in Africa than it is being in Orlando. Well, she loved it. She had a blast. And at the end of it, she was just raving to the person who took us on this tour about how much she loved it. And they said, well, hey, if you like this, we have Adventures by Disney. And Adventures by Disney has all these trips around the world. And he's telling her, oh, you don't ever have to worry about your luggage and stuff. We take care of it for you. So
they
all
said
of these
the
things
magic
just
words.
And so when it came time for our trip the next year, she said, I want to go to Africa, because she had requested the Adventures by Disney guide, and she looked all through it, and it was Africa. Well, I said, okay, but I'm going on one of the adults only expeditions. I am not going on the one with kids.
No, a family friendly trip has two adults.
All the ones for Africa were full sold out. So I said, pick another one that's adults only, and we'll do Africa the next year. Well, the one she picked, weirdly enough, was Vietnam. We ended up going to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos for a trip. And
on a Disney trip.
Yeah. And so it's like, you're visiting Angkor Wat in Cambodia and all these temples, and it was incredible because it truly was stress-free. Disney takes care of absolutely everything. You pay for it. You pay a lot for it. But it was kind of like a new type of cruise for my mom, because there was no stress about border crossings or anything like that, because Disney took care of it for you. And so, she loved that. And then the next year, we did end up going to Zimbabwe on safari, but it wasn't through Disney, because I wanted a less Disney-fied experience. I was going to take my cameras, of course, more than one now. And I wanted to go on an actual safari. But the organization I went through, it's kind of like glamping, this luxury camping.
Yeah.
So while the safaris are real, your accommodations aren't some tent out in the savannah. It's a place my mom would feel comfortable with. So yeah, that was great.
That's fantastic. Because I've done one Disney cruise. It's the only cruise I've ever done in my life, and probably the only cruise I will ever do, because I'm not getting back on a cruise ship for a very long time.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, if you picked one, Princess was my mom's favorite. But we did a Mediterranean Disney cruise, and I have to say that if you had to do just one, that's not a bad one to manage. So you picked a good company, because Disney really takes care of you on those things.
It was. Yeah, I felt like if there's a time and a place for Disney level service and cleanliness and those positive assumptions I have about the brand, a cruise is a place for it.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that I would never just up and take my mom to Vietnam. I would do that. I've done all kinds of places in the world. But my mother taking her to Vietnam, especially when I'd never been there before, didn't know what to expect. No, but man, Disney they have magic in their branding, and did they live up to it. They did an incredible job on that trip. That was a great vacation. That I'm going to tuck that away in my brain about, because you're right. Like my brother took my mom to Amsterdam a couple years ago, which was her first international trip. He was adding it onto a conference and did the same, and took my dad with him to Singapore, and took my nephew with him to Japan, so that I'm going for a conference, add a week of vacation to it. That's how I always do it. Absolutely. I feel like that's an important life lesson, that you're going all that way. Why fly back and then fly somewhere else? And so anytime I had a trip to Europe for work, I added a vacation onto it. Why not? You're already there. Yeah. So I feel like, my brother and my mom going to Amsterdam and just they just did a different museum every day for 10 days. One city,
all art museums and the canal tours and right, like my brother had been before, so he knew what to expect and what to plan for. But I hear you, like a Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia trip, you need a guide. You need someone to plan that out for you if you haven't been before.
Well, I'm exactly the opposite. I just love picking up, hopping on a plane, landing, and then just figuring it out from there. I very rarely do any ahead planning because I just like to go there, be in the moment, find out where locals recommend. That's how you have the best vacations. But with my mother, it was a different story. I mean, that's how I would do Vietnam. That's not how I would take my mom to do Vietnam. But it always worked out. She was game for anything, and so some of the places we ended up were really cool, and that trip was definitely one of them. And so I have all these great memories with my mother right up to that Africa safari trip where that was the last trip I got to take with her.
Yeah.
And it was what a fantastic memory to go out with on. So I always got along really well with my parents. So traveling with my mom was not a big deal, but boy, even if you don't always get along with your parents, and even if the idea of traveling with them kind of mortifies you of being stuck with your parent, I still recommend it because the memories you're going to get from that, it's a shared adventure rather than just your take on something. And I just am so grateful that I got so many years of travel with my mom. It was perfect.
That's great. I did do a couple New York adventures with my parents. I took my mom, my dad, and I all went to New York one weekend because I had gotten Hamilton tickets. And so my mom and I went to Hamilton one night, and then we went another day. We went to art galleries in Chelsea for my dad because he's a sculptor. And then we learned how do you submit to shows in New York on that weekend, and we submitted, and he got accepted to a show a few months later. So then my dad and I did a road trip to New York with his sculptures for a show in Chelsea, which was very cool.
Yeah, there's no experiences like that. And it doesn't have to be anything extravagant. It could be to the other side of your state. I mean, it's just that there's something about a shared adventure and travel that really gets you to bond with another person. And a lot of times, you go on trips with your friends. Your parents can become your friend if you're sharing an adventure like that, where you both don't know what to expect and stuff. So I'm really grateful. And I even if the idea just really makes you bristle, I'd say give it a second thought, because your parents are not going to be around forever. And a memory like that is something that you just can't replace.
Right. Well, that's why God made hotels with multiple rooms. You can travel with your parents without sharing a room.
Yeah.
Which makes it easier. Tell me more about your trip to Antarctica. So the last trip you took your DSLR with you, and I will say whatever phone I had after that trip until I turned it in, one of your penguin photographs was my phone wallpaper for like 2 years.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. How did you find that trip? Tell me all the things about that trip to Antarctica.
Well, Antarctica had been on my bucket list for over a decade. I had first of all, it was a continent to check off my list. It was the seventh continent. It's the continent I hadn't been to. I'd been to all the others. It was that continent that I wanted to get to, but it's not as expensive as people might think to go to Antarctica. It's just not. You have to get a ticket down to South America. Then you fly into Ushuaia, which is the southmost major city, and then you hop on a boat. Those trips are not hugely expensive. So if you just want to go to Antarctica and, that's the only thing you want to do is claim that you've set foot on the seventh continent, it's not as expensive as you might think. I have spent more on European type vacations than I have on what that would have cost.
Right.
But that's not the way I wanted to do it because it's what I wanted to do is that I wanted to take photographs, and that's the only reason I wanted to do it. And two things caused me to pull the trigger in 2017. First of all was that just the year prior, yet another huge chunk of Antarctica broke off.
Yeah.
And, thanks to climate change and all of that, Antarctica that once is kind of disappearing. And so I thought, better be sooner than later. And then a nature wildlife photographer who I just worship at him. The stuff he does, his name is Will Berard Lucas, and he's an English guy, and he does trips to Africa where he does highly specialized wildlife photography. And it is some of the most amazing stuff you'll ever see. I was a fan for many years. He was advertising on his blog that he was going to be part of a photo expedition to Antarctica. So it's like, here I am with the opportunity of going one of the places I've always wanted to go, someplace that probably isn't going to be around for, another decade, like we know it.
Yeah.
Like you see it in the pictures. And that one of the greatest photographers that I've ever seen in contemporary times was going to be on. And so it was hugely expensive because this was not a
This is not a cruise
just
ship
showing
from
up
Ushuaia.
there. No,
yeah.
There's this is an expedition company, a photo expedition company. They handle everything. They rent out an entire ship. So all the professional photographers are on staff. They do all this itinerary planning and customization and stuff. And it's a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money, but it was worth every cent because it ended up being one of the most incredible things I've ever done. And had I just shown up in Ushuaia and hopped on a ship and landed there, it would not have been the same at all.
Was he doing master classes, or was he saying, everybody come over here, here's how to frame this shot, or here's how you do lighting on a glacier?
All of the professional photographers that were there were available if you wanted their expertise. And a lot of people, that's why they went. And they had classes and everything. I mainly skipped that because by that point, I'd been taking photographs for 20 years. I know what I'm doing and everything. So it was just an opportunity to meet him, pick his brain at dinner about locations and things he's done and stuff. That's why I wanted it. I was not going there looking for photography instruction, though that was certainly there if that's what you wanted. So I paid a lot of money for something that I never truly took advantage of, but it was a fantastic trip. One of the best.
Yeah. I have been to Ushuaia because I studied abroad in Argentina. And at the end of my semester, I flew down to Ushuaia, and with the goal of, I did not have a plan. There was no goal. I flew to Ushuaia. I wasn't sure about my return ticket to the US. When exactly I was going to go back. And I got there and I was reading through my guidebook, and I saw that there was, so I had studied abroad in La Plata, which is the capital of the province of Buenos Aires. Mm-hmm. And I had, in La Plata, I had interned at a place called Cida Paint, which was the national paint laboratory of Argentina. And when I got to Ushuaia, I saw that there was CADIC, which was their lab, their national lab, and that it wasn't open for tourists, but it was open to visiting scientists. And I was studying chemistry. So I was like, well, I'm a visiting scientist. And I took the bus to CADIC and walked in, and I was like, "Hi, I'm Leah Jones. I'm a chemistry student from the US. Can I have an internship?" And they were like, "Well, let's walk you around." And they just took me from lab to lab, seeing if anybody needed an intern, and found this guy who was studying the effects of the hole in the ozone layer on the bogs in Ushuaia. And he was from Utah, and he was like, "Sure, join my team." And so for 2 weeks, I stayed in a hostel and I interned. I put quotes around that, on this team, and got to go out into a bog to measure, to take samples and then measure the size of leaves from the bog. And it was a very cool. So I was in Ushuaia for 2 or 3 weeks over Thanksgiving. I loved it. It was a really fun adventure. And definitely every day you saw the cruise ships lining up and the people who were doing the cruise ship version of Antarctica.
Yeah, but there's no landing. If you take a cruise ship to Antarctica, I'm using air quotes here, you just float by Antarctica. You don't actually land on it because that requires special permits. There's international treaties and everything involved. And so, but Ushuaia has all kinds of companies, but they book up pretty quick. So if you want to go to Antarctica, and another thing is that you have to know what you're signing up for. I have been on water most of my life. I've been on sailboats. I've been in rough seas. I've been on cruise ships. I've been on ocean liners. I've been on all types of different things. That crossing of the Drake Passage from the tip of Argentina to the tip of Antarctica was the worst I've ever been in. We had some people on that expedition who did not get to Antarctica. They arrived with compound fractures from being thrown down stairwells and everything like that. And there were some people, one person hurt themselves in Ushuaia, broke their ankle, and so they couldn't go. And then another poor gentleman, he was, they tell you to stay in bed, you put your life jackets to the side of you so you're not rolling around, because the swells are basically swamping the ship.
Yeah.
And it's an old research vessel, so it's all metal. There's no soft areas corners on it. And it's like, if you have to go to the bathroom, you have to go to the bathroom. And that's why you find out why their bathroom is able to be hosed down, because,
oh my God.
because that's all she wrote. But some poor gentleman, he was going to the mess hall for dinner, and a swell hit the ship broadside, and the ship basically went up on its side, threw him down a stairwell, and he ended up with multiple compound fractures. And so he had to be airlifted out of Antarctica. We were either going to turn around, but the water was so rough we couldn't do that.
Right.
So we continued on to some base for Chile. Chile has a base there. And so part of when you sign up, you have to buy insurance, evacuation insurance. And because it costs, it could cost $100,000 to have. It's a specialized flight coming out of Chile, flying to Antarctica, which is a massively long flight.
Yeah,
and stuff. And so it's a huge expense. Well, fortunately, we all had to have it. And he was airlifted back to Chile. Had to spend weeks there before being transferred back to Florida, and then it was weeks there before he was transferred back to his home. So it's a deal, but it's not always that way, because I asked one of the photographers that was on that trip, I said, he went again the next year. And I said, well, is it better or worse than what we had? And he said it was smooth as glass the entire way.
Wow. My older sister and her husband worked for 13 years on the ice, 13 seasons in Antarctica. And they flew in and out of New Zealand to get to McMurdo Station, I think. And this was their first year that they were planning to stay home. And it's also the first year that there are no scientists on the ice, because of a combination of COVID and Trump. that there is no ability you can't safely get people. You quarantine for 2 weeks in New Zealand, and then the weather has to be good enough to get you to the ice. And so they've got a skeleton crew on the station this year, just to maintenance staff, mess hall, but they weren't able to take any scientists down this season.
Yeah, it's extraordinary times, and it's like I said, there's not a year that I haven't qualified for frequent flyer top tier programs in multiple airlines.
Yeah.
And to go from that to not traveling at all, the last trip I did being in December, it's a heck of an adjustment.
When it's safe to travel again, what's on your hopeful upcoming agenda in the next maybe 5 years or so of travel?
Well, there's really only there's several places I would like to go. Many places in the world. I mean, I've been to a lot of places, but the world is big. There's a lot of other places out there that I would love to go to. Spain is one of my most favorite countries on earth. I went there 5 times over 6 years, and there's still places in Spain I would love to go, but don't have to go. The only place like that left for me is India. I was supposed to go to India for my 50th birthday. And the reason I wanted to do it is because the celebration of color, which is Holi, the Holi festival, it coincided with my birthday.
Wow.
In March on my 50th birthday. And so I was going to do it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to. I had some emergency stuff come up. But that was the plan for that year. And so it is my great missed opportunity that I really feel that before I die, I've got to get to India.
And I've been to Barcelona twice. Once was a vacation just for myself. That was a week, and I met up with a friend, and she went to Madrid, and she went to a couple places in Spain, and then met me in Barcelona. And I was just like, I'm only interested in going to Barcelona on this trip, so I'm going to be there for a whole week. And it was phenomenal, and I understood pretty quickly why it's a place that people return to.
Oh yeah, I've been to Barcelona three times. I've been to Barcelona, and once I took my mother because it is one of my favorite cities on earth, and so I just loved it. And this was that Disney cruise that I went on.
Okay, yeah,
that was out of Barcelona, and to me that was like, oh well, I get to show my mom my favorite city on earth. Not my favorite city, but one of my favorite cities. Spain is like that, though. It completely took me off guard. I flew to Barcelona to go to, I think I wanted to go to a museum exhibit. And I was working in Amsterdam. I flew to Barcelona, and I absolutely loved it. And I thought, I'm going to have to go back. There's just too much here to see. And so I did. And then I started looking at other places I might like to go in Spain. Well, Madrid is fantastic. And then the south of Spain is fantastic. And the north of Spain is fantastic. There are all these amazing places, and they're all incredibly different from each other with such incredible history behind them. I mean, because the regions of Spain are like more divided in some ways than European countries are. And so that's one of those countries that I don't hesitate to recommend, and I absolutely love it there. Would dearly love to go back one of these days. And also Portugal. Portugal is amazing as well.
I've seen in the last few years Portugal, like more and more of my friends have gone to Portugal. I feel like the same friends that maybe 8 or 10 years ago were going to Croatia are now going to Portugal. That it just seems like a beautiful combination. Obviously, it's a very small country, but reminds me of Argentina in that there are so many types of topographies. There's mountains, so probably more like Chile. Mountains, ocean, amazing food and culture. I would like to go to Portugal.
Well, even if you just go to Lisbon, I mean, that's the problem with so many of these countries. It's like you say Portugal and everyone goes, "Oh, Lisbon." Well, no, it's not just Lisbon.
Right.
But even if you only went to Lisbon, it's an amazing place to go. The art and culture and food even is just beyond.
I'm anxious to go back to Israel to.
A place I've never been, by the way, so take me with you.
Yes. You would love it. You would, because it's, so I grew up in Indiana, and the first time I went to New York City, I was 16 years old. I was just like wowed by how old things in New York were. Just like, there's nothing this old in Indiana. Things here are really old. And then I went to London and worked in London, and again was wowed by how old things are in London. The centuries of history you can feel when you walk around London. And then I went to Jerusalem for the first time. And as someone, from the Midwest, from a young state, that feeling of like deepening of Western culture. I won't say of like all civilization, but of Western culture of that to me has been the progression of being wowed with Rome in the middle. I did get to go to Rome.
Oh, Rome is all of Italy. People always ask me for recommendations on travel places. And if you don't have a big travel background, Italy is such a safe bet. I mean, you're going to find food you like. You're going to, most everybody speaks English enough that you can get around. The history and culture there is just amazing. And it's kind of a no-brainer place to recommend. Have you been to Asia?
I've been to Japan when I used to work and study abroad. I oversaw programs in Latin America and Japan. And because I had studied abroad in Latin America, they sent me to Japan to try and even out my love for the countries I served.
Well, there's some talk about ancient structures. Japan, and even more so in China, if you ever have a chance to get to China, the civilization there is just, I don't know how else to say it. It's just antique. It's just some of the places you go, it's like you think the U.S. is, practically nothing compared to to what's going there. Which is kind of glossing over the fact that a very amazing Native American culture existed here before what we consider the USA to be. Existed both throughout the Americas, including Mexico, which is another place that is just mind-bogglingly amazing to go to if you like.
In college, I did a trip to where we did Mexico City and Puebla, and so we did go and see pyramids in Mexico, and that was also phenomenal. But I haven't been to Egypt. I haven't seen the Great Pyramids, which would be wonderful. Yeah, it's hard I sometimes have a hard time picking between, because sometimes I look at, because I've been to Israel so many times. I've been at least a dozen times, because I have so many friends there, and they keep getting married and they keep having babies, and I got to meet those babies. So that draw to see friends and the people that I love versus seeing a new part of the world is, and so in the last few years, I was like, okay, you have to start going other places in the world. It can't just be seeing. Israel became a trip home to see family. And then that's when I went to Barcelona. And then the second time I went to Barcelona was a work trip. So I added a weekend in Paris afterwards, which was not enough time. I was freelancing and feeling unstable about my finances. So, and I do regret only staying like a couple of nights in Paris. I should have just sucked it up and stayed the week.
Yeah, Paris is one of those cities, especially I'm a big museum fan, art museum fan. And so, Paris, you could spend a month just going to the museums in Paris and the surrounds. Unless you just want to do one of those brisk walkthroughs where you don't actually get to see and study anything. And so none of my trips are long enough. You never have long enough, but yeah. And so many of my places that I've gone have just been for 1 or 2 nights, like Egypt. That was 2 nights because it was on a cruise, and that's all you get. And so you just have to make the most of it. But some people like the comfort of going back to the same place over and over and over again. I have a friend, they go to Belgium. That's the only place they vacation. And it's because they have extended family that lives there. That's the only place they want to go. And it's not like they fly into Belgium and then go somewhere else. They fly into Belgium and they stay in Belgium. And it's like, who am I to tell you what is going to tickle your travel fancy? So yeah, you got to do what matters to you. The only thing that is that if we ever end up going to Israel together, what is the street? As you know, I'm vegetarian.
Yes.
Falafel is my favorite food on earth. I can eat falafel 7 days a week. Is it Ben Yehuda? That's the street.
Yes.
That's the falafel street in Israel, right?
In Jerusalem. Ben Yehuda is it kind of comes down a hill and it meets Jaffa Road, which is the road that now the light rail goes into, but Jaffa Road goes right into the old city to Jaffa Gate. But Ben Yehuda has a bunch of so many places where you can get falafel up and down Ben Yehuda and get yelled at for being a brave American tourist and get your falafel. But
it wouldn't be the first time for me.
Yes. Israel is like the number one destination for people that are vegetarian and vegans. And Israel adjusted so quickly to high-end vegan choices. And so it is a very easy country to be a vegetarian and travel as a vegetarian and have outstanding falafel, but also just like...
but that's all I want. So you can just drop me on the street and then you go hang with your friends or whatever. I'll eat falafel for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and be happy because I could do that.
There's nothing better in the world than an Israeli hotel breakfast buffet. It's salads, cheese, pastries, not usually falafel for breakfast, which these buffets that I had never seen before because
But yeah, you were talking about brave American tourists because I go to some out of the way places. And for the most part, I find that the way that Americans put danger on countries where they're just living their life is kind of ridiculous. I have one time that, a couple times where it's been touched upon. When I was in Egypt, anytime I left the hotel, like to go to the Hard Rock Hotel, the Hard Rock Cafe in Cairo, your car is inspected for bombs and all that other stuff because they don't want you coming into hotels. Things like that are common. But once you realize how much safer that makes you like having an armed guy on your tour bus because you're safer than you are taking a tour bus a lot of places in the United States. And so a lot of the times I find that the danger is overblown. But there has been one time I was in Bali. I was vacationing at the Hard Rock Hotel. It was the first Hard Rock Hotel. There's cafes everywhere, but this is the first Hard Rock Hotel that I know of. And I had always wanted to go to Bali anyway. The people are supposed to be incredibly nice. It's a beautiful island and all that. And so I wanted to go. And so I booked my time at the Hard Rock Hotel and had an amazing vacation, way too short. The Balinese people are just some of the most generous, open, caring people on earth. On the way back, I was stopping in Jakarta to go to the Hard Rock Cafe, Jakarta. And I was only staying in there for a night. And when I hopped on the plane, in order to go to Jakarta, they couldn't land because there was a bombing at the airport and something was under siege and all that other stuff. And so we ended up going back to Singapore, which is where I started because that's where I was working. And so, it's just like, sometimes your plans don't happen. A cruise port is closed for some reason. There's an outbreak on your ship, which has never happened to me, but I understand it can happen nowadays. And so, it was just one of those things. But other than that, there's only, had I landed, that probably would have been quite an adventure,
Right.
And then the only other time is that in our Disney trip to Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, we flew in to Laos. We flew into one city before going into our ultimate city, which is Luang Prabang or something like that. And I didn't know it, but the plane after ours hit a wind squall and crashed. All people died. Everybody died in the crash. It was the one that landed right after ours, like within minutes of ours. Could have been our plane.
Yeah.
Same route and everything. Well, it wasn't until I woke up the next day and there were a bunch of comments on my blog from people going, please tell me that you're okay, that you're not on that. Because I had published my itinerary on my blog where I was going to be. And then I had like a vague time frame that was the same time frame as this other crash. And so, I woke up and so I had to go post and say, hey, everybody, not my flight. And then things like that are kind of sobering. But man, you think to all the places I've been, all the travel I've done, and that's the closest I've ever come. I mean, you could slip in the bathtub and have worse odds at home. So I just think a lot of the danger, it's a shame because it keeps a lot of people from traveling that might otherwise do so.
Yeah. Before I went to Israel for the first time, I don't remember if my parents actually talked to my rabbi or if my rabbi relayed this message through me. That he said, my parents were, because my dad has always kept a passport, and since I studied abroad in the 90s, in order to come and get my body, in case he needed to come and get me, which is such an act of caring from a parent to have a passport while their kid goes off and sees the world so that they can, in an emergency, be your emergency contact. So my parents had asked my rabbi about the safety of going to Israel, and he was just like, she's just got to watch out for the drivers. She's much more likely to die in a car accident in Israel than in a bombing. So don't worry about the bombings, but tell her to be careful in a car.
Yeah, but that's true in Detroit. If you go to Detroit, that's the most scared I've been. That's probably the most scared I've been is driving in Detroit.
Oh, really? Because everybody thinks they're a race car driver?
Well, I just think that they have a level of comfort with driving that I don't have. So when they go blowing by you at 90 miles an hour and a type of thing, and in my defense, what put me on edge is that one of them went by me at 90 miles per hour and took off my side view mirror.
Oh,
so
that's a fair concern.
Yeah.
Is there anything about travel that I haven't asked you about that you wanted to make sure to share?
Only that everybody should do it. My first trip by myself was to Japan for work. I'm a graphic designer. I end up with work all around the world for printing and consultations and things like that. And it was my first trip out of the country. I think it was in 96, I want to say. And it was my first trip out. And I had always wanted to go to Japan because my dad was in the Navy. And in his, he had this handmade trunk that he had all of his souvenirs from all of his travels. And one of the things in there was a little atlas book where he had all of the routes his ships and submarines took and all the places that he'd been. And he had some Japanese manga, some comic book type things. And it may not have even been a book. It may have been like it was a paper that had manga in it. And of course, in Japan, they write in kanji and kana and everything. So it's not even letters you can translate. You have to really study for it. And so my first trip was to Japan, which is probably shock therapy for traveling, because as you know from having been there, it's a very different place. It's a very insular society, very complex social economics and things like that you have to know. But I went. And in 1996, didn't speak any of the language, but had an amazing time. And my eyes were just opened to things that you think you know from watching television or reading books. And it's until you actually experience it yourself that you actually get to find out what it was. And from there, I studied Japanese. I went back to Japan many times, became conversationally fluent in Japanese, and ended up having work in Japan and things like that. And from there, I went many other places, including places like Thailand. I don't consider myself to be a Buddhist, but Buddhist philosophy is kind of how I govern my faith. And I picked that up because of a trip to Thailand I took while being in Bangkok. And I've learned so much about people of the world. And it's just, especially now, we all seem so far apart. Even within our own country, we seem so far apart. When it comes to traveling the world in other countries, some of those differences can almost seem insurmountable because it's just so alien to what to everything you know. But the further, it's kind of like a drug, in that once you start, you don't want to stop, because everything in humanity that binds us together is far more common than those things that divide us. And the best way to know that, the easiest way is probably to watch foreign movies, and you'll get a taste for foreign cultures and stuff. But it's another thing entirely to go there and live it, to meet people who, you may have been taught since childhood that, oh, you should hate this person because they're from this country and that's just what we believe here. And you have no context for it, but you do it. You just do it because that's how you were raised. And fortunately, I don't have that experience. My parents were amazingly open-minded and let me find my bliss no matter where it led me. So I had a little easier time of it than others. But I think that if you have less of an easy time embracing foreign cultures and attitudes and things, that's even more of a reason for you to go. Because it's finding all of those commonalities with people who you may not even speak the same language, their culture, their faith, their religion, the way they live may be so completely alien to how you are. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, there's so many things that we all have in common. There's so many things that unite us as a people and as a global society. And I am confident that the only way to really know that, even if it's just going to the UK, there's no language barrier, there's nothing there, but their attitudes are different, and the way their society works is different, and things like that. And just a taste of that will help you more when you get home relate to your fellow Americans, as opposed to, constantly being at odds with people because of what they believe or things like that. And travel truly is my favorite thing from that respect, and that respect alone, in that I have been amazingly privileged to have gotten to travel to all of these places and met so many different people and formed friendships all around the world. And it just makes me feel a part of the world as opposed to just being here on it. And I want that experience for everybody. I want everybody to know that experience. You're well-traveled, so you can probably relate to that. And And it also has to do with stepping out of your comfort zone. We get so complacent in the things that we're told. You have to do it this way because this is the way we've always done it, and this is the way. Stepping out of that bubble and learning that there's different ways to look at things, there's different ways to experience things. There's no substitute for it. And if even 10% more of the world were to travel than what is able to travel, or who does travel now, were to just pick up and start seeking out discomfort and seeking out other experiences and seeking out other ways of life, I think this world would be a much better place. Because that's how it happens. That's how the understanding between people happens. And sometimes, and I think a lot of Americans can speak from it on this point, especially lately, that it may actually be easier for you to start with trying to relate to someone who's radically different than you than someone that lives in the same town who may have a different belief than you do. It's an easier way to get your foot in the door, to just pick up and go someplace, experience the world, see the history of civilization that we've built, and even more so, learn of the mistakes we've made, because so many places you go. And I think probably the last one I'll end this on was I went to Poland, and it was because there was a Hard Rock Cafe in Warsaw, and I had never intended to go to Poland. It wasn't one of those places on my list to go. But a friend from the UK, who is also a Hard Rock Cafe fan, said, "Hey, you're working in Europe. I'm living in Europe. Let's meet in Warsaw." Well, Warsaw is one of those places, Poland as a whole, that it's still an East Bloc country in some ways.
Yeah, I was there last summer.
And so, I mean, when I was there, you still go to a store and you don't shop down aisles. You go to a counter and you ask for what you want, which is difficult if you don't speak Polish. And so what we did is that we were very smart about it. Usually I don't care for tour guides and stuff, but we hired one. And Warsaw was it's a more recent trip. It wasn't that long ago. But you take this tour and you go through the places and you go, during the war, this place was destroyed. Everybody was killed. And then you go to the next place, another subsection of the city. During the war, this place was destroyed. Everybody was killed. And then you go to the next place and it's the same thing. And he has a flip book of pictures showing you where you're standing and what it was after the war, after it was basically obliterated. There's parts of Poland that didn't even exist as Poland for decades. And then you see how the people have come back from that, from utter ruin, utter desolation. They've managed to come back from it. They've managed to rebuild. They've managed to form a new society built on what was once there, and learn from their mistakes and try to do better. And that's a really sobering experience, and something I never would have gotten. I mean, I've read the history books. I know very well the history of the war and things like that. But to go there and see it and experience it is something entirely different, and you won't get that from a book.
You won't. There are these in the old city in Warsaw. They have these signs with photographs, and it's just like, here's what the view was standing here after, like, here's what the rubble looked like. And because they have been able to, what is the word? It's not renovate or rehabilitate. Reconstruct. Yeah. The old city of Warsaw and put it into its pre-war glory, and it's beautiful and it's vibrant, but they make sure you remember how much work they had to do. Yeah.
When you were there, I take it you saw the statue of the littlest insurgent.
Probably I saw so many statues.
Well, this one is kind of hard to put behind you once you see it. During the uprising there, the Jewish ghetto was being overrun. They knew they were all dead. There was nothing left. There was no hope. Nobody was coming to save them. The forces were advancing on them. It was all over. And so what they committed to was that they would take out as many Nazis as they could, as long as they were alive and breathing. And to do that, they ended up arming the children and teaching them how to shoot.
Yeah.
And there's a statue of a little boy with a gun and a helmet way too big on his head. And he's standing there. And when you see it, you think, well, that's kind of odd. But then you're told what it represents. And it's that the people there knew they were going to die. And so the children were fighting a war. And this is, this kid is probably 5 or something, just old enough to barely hold a gun. And that's something that, try to imagine an American parent in that position with their 5-year-old child, knowing that they're going to be dying and that saying, well, all of us, every one of us, from our oldest to our youngest, for our last breath is going to do what we can to live. And, arming children like that and knowing that you're going to die is just something that you can read that in a book too, but until you're standing in the place where it happened, you're standing there, you're seeing the ruins, you're seeing the statue of what went on there. That is not something that ever leaves you. And I think that if more people had experiences like that, they would be less likely to want to wage war. They'd be less likely to want to attack something because they don't understand it, or they don't want to understand it, or it's different. Because if you can put yourself in the place of the person who's arming their 5-year-old kid who's going to die, and think, boy, that's something we never want to ever have happen again.
Yeah.
That's how you do it. You go to the Warsaw Ghetto, you see the statue, you learn what it means, and you do your part to make sure it never happens again.
Amen. This is beautiful. Thank you so much for spending part of Thanksgiving with me today.
What else was I going to do, Leah? What else was I going to do? Thanksgiving was canceled here, and I have no pumpkins to roast.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry that no pumpkin showed up on your doorstep, because I think Jenny and Jake would enjoy chewing on some pumpkin flesh. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, have a good afternoon of what you can make of it. And give the kitties... do the
same. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Thank you. Give the kitties scritches for me.
I will.
Great.
Tell your cat's disappeared again.
He decided he was bored. So, yeah.
Well, I didn't think I was that bad of an interview.
Well, he doesn't have I don't have cat headphones for him.
Oh, no. Well, something for the future then.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.